Well, one of the things that I was interested in talking to Lucille about was place. How our work is locked into where we happen to live and to what extent it is, and what happens if our lives are abruptly disrupted and we have to pick up from where we are and go someplace else. When I was roughly the age that Lucille is now, I got married again and went back to the West Coast where I hadn't been for 13 or 14 years. And it was a whole new life. And I found that it did affect my writing output for quite a while, but when I really got cranked up again, I felt that certain advances had been made. Lucille had an even more violent uprooting than I did after her husband Fred died, and shortly thereafter she moved to the West Coast. Although she'd never been to the West Coast, I don't believe. Had
No,
you?
I had never been to the West Coast. I mean, I had been once in Fresno, in San Jose rather, and I had never thought of myself as a West Coast person at all. I had thought that if you can't be near the New York Times on Sunday, you probably don't live a civilized life. I had no idea that it was different, that just even the landscape was different. I had no concept. And so that was a little difficult. Last year I didn't write, in 1984, the year in my husband was ill, and the year in which he died, and we had been married, we had been together 30 years. We'd been married 26 and a half years. I wrote one poem during that year. And I find myself, when I started flowing again, I had to first of all get past writing poems about that experience. And then I'm writing poems, for instance, that deal with Native American culture. And writing poems that have mountains in them. And I wrote a poem about the Atlantic Ocean as my reaction to the Pacific Ocean. And these are two different oceans, which was, you know, absolutely different kind of things. I was surprised. I adore the Pacific. It's a great ocean.
I feel a much more intimate connection with it somehow. It's a more human ocean to me in a funny way.
I was trying to explain that to somebody. This is a kind ocean. One of the things that I adore about the West is the Pacific Ocean. And so I wrote a poem about that. I was trying to talk to someone, a transplanted New Englander, about how I felt about the Pacific and about the Atlantic. And she was telling me, no, the Pacific is no good, lousy ocean. The Atlantic is the real ocean. And even if I didn't have the history that I do have, I wouldn't have felt that way. But how could I explain to her a black person's feeling about the Atlantic? And so this poem is a try at that. And I'm very fond of the Pacific, though I'm sure my Oriental friends have feelings about the Pacific as well. It starts with a song I used to sing when I used to be a good Baptist. Them bones will rise again. Them bones will walk again. Them bones will talk again. Now hear the word of the Lord. Atlantic is a sea of bones. My bones. My elegant Africans connecting Wida and New York. A bridge of ivory. Seabed, they call it. In its arms, my early mothers sleep. Some women leapt with babies in their arms. Some women wept and threw the babies in. Maternal armies pace the Atlantic floor. I call my name into the roar of surf, and something awful answers.
Well, what you were saying about that life, that peripatetic life of exploring the country in a car, not being available to black women or black people, always reminds me too that if you're a woman of whatever color, you get to a strange town at night and you want to go out and walk around, maybe drop in for a drink or something, this life is not accessible to us either. And I think it makes a big difference. There's something, the way men can have easy, casual encounters anywhere they go without being harassed, without getting someone to come up and say, "You look lonely, little lady," you know, and all that nonsense, or worse. These constrictions on our lives are unfortunate, and I think they're bad for writers particularly, because I think we are like the myth of Antaeus, that we work best and survive best if we have one foot in the dirt.
This poem is called Bitch, and I'm using it in the technical sense of the word, not as a pejorative description. Now when he and I meet, after all these years, I say to the bitch inside me, don't start growling. He isn't a trespasser anymore, just an old acquaintance tipping his hat. My voice says, nice to see you, as the bitch starts to bark hysterically. He isn't an enemy now. Where are your manners, I say, as I say, how are the children? They must be growing up. At a kind word from him, a look like the old days, the bitch changes her tone. She begins to whimper. She wants to snuggle up to him, to cringe. Down, girl, keep your distance, or I'll give you a taste of the choke chain. Fine, just fine, I tell him. She slobbers and grovels. After all, I am her mistress. She is basically loyal. It's just that she remembers how she came running each evening when she heard his step, how she lay at his feet and looked up adoringly, though he was absorbed in his paper, or, bored with her devotion, ordered her to the kitchen until he was ready to play. But the small, careless kindnesses, when he'd had a good day or a couple of drinks, come back to her now, seem more important than the casual cruelties, the ultimate dismissal. It's nice to know you were doing so well, I say. He couldn't have taken you with him. You were too demonstrative, too clumsy, not like the well-groomed pets of his new friends. Give my regards to your wife, I say. You gag as I drag you off by the scruff, saying, goodbye, goodbye. Nice to have seen you again.
I also think it's important to realize that, in another sense, all of our work is political. I know I gave a reading not long ago, and somebody came up afterwards and said to my husband, oh, I like the political one she read, and he said, oh, but they're all political. And I think somebody wrote a book called The Garden is Political, and I think that applies to us. It is a question of attitude rather than specifics.
Gwendolyn Brooks said somebody, this is some time ago, Gwendolyn Brooks said somebody asked her why she didn't write more politically, and she said, when I walk down the street, it is a political statement.
Precisely.
And one of the things I think about, and I have thought about, is the women of South Africa, all of the women of South Africa. And anyway, this poem was, you understand, a moment of being a little annoyed, and it is called There. There in the homelands, they are arresting children. They are beating children and shooting children. In Joburg, a woman sits on her veranda. She sits on her veranda watching her child. Her child is playing on their lawn. Her man comes home from arresting children. She smiles. She offers him a drink. Each morning, I practice forgetting that woman. When her sister calls me sister, I remind myself, there is there. This last is a poem. The last line of this poem is something, a line I've been thinking about a long time, and I finally found the poem to put it in. It was written before the events in South Africa became the latest events in South Africa became very public. I was thinking about children as a mother of 6, grandmother of several. I feel that I do that all the time. And I thought about what must children think of us. I've never been a person who believed that all of the extraordinary things happening in the world were done by aliens or strangers or people over there. I try to remember always that I am capable of being a horrible human being. And if I can remember that, I then can realize that I am also capable of trying to be kind of a good one. Anyway, this is called Sorrow Song. For the eyes of the children, the last to melt, the last to vaporize, For the lingering eyes of the children staring, the eyes of the children of Buchenwald, of Vietnam and Johannesburg, for the eyes of the children of Nagasaki, for the eyes of the children of Middle Passage, for Cherokee eyes, Ethiopian eyes, Russian eyes, American eyes, for all that remains of the children, their eyes, staring at us, amazed to see the extraordinary evil in ordinary men.
I've almost learned not to listen to what people say after I've given a reading, because there's so often a radical misunderstanding of what I've been trying to say, unless, of course, there's always the possibility that I have misunderstood what I was trying to say. But we really are listening to ourselves all the time, even when we think we're trying very hard to listen to other people.
And I think something you just said is really important, that all of our trying, all of our writing, I think, is a trying to say. You know, that we make a mistake, I think, if we start saying that our writing is a saying. It is, at best, a trying to say.
Yes, exactly.
Indeed.
And it's, you know, I forget who said you never finish a poem, you just abandon it. And I think that's very true. There's always this difference and this distance between the original concept, which I'm always convinced is quite perfect inside here, and I'm getting it out with equipment that's not the greatest.
Just to prove that winning a prize or two doesn't necessarily silence the poet while she has a small nervous breakdown, I'll read a couple of poems I've written since I won the Pulitzer this year. This is called To an Unknown Poet. I haven't the heart to say you are not welcome here. Your clothes smell of poverty, illness, and unswept closets. You come unannounced to my door with your wild-faced wife and your many children. I tell you I am busy. I have a dentist's appointment. I have a terrible cold. The children would run mad through our living room with its collected bibelots and objects of art. I'm not as young as I was. I am terrified of breakage. It's not that I won't help you. I'd love to send you a box of hand-milled soap, perhaps a check, though it won't be enough to help. Keep in mind that I came to your reading. 3 of us in the audience, your wife, myself, and the bookstore owner. Unless we count the children who played trains over your wife's knees in their torn jeans and had to be hushed and hushed. Next month, I'm getting an award from the American Academy and Institute of Arts and Letters. The invitation came on hand-laid paper thick as clotted cream. I will travel by taxi to 156th Street, where the noble old building, as pale as the Acropolis, is awash in a sea of slums. And you will be far away on the other coast, as far from our thoughts as Rimbaud with his boy's face and broken teeth, while we eat and drink and congratulate each other in this bastion of culture.
The good thing is to try something sufficiently ambitious that you risk not getting it just right.
That's what we talked about in the group I was with this morning. We talked about risk. It's all about risk-taking.
It's all about risk.
And you really cannot do it safely.
No.
It's just not a safe business.
And it's of no interest to you or anybody else if you do what you already know how to do.
Yeah, over and over again. I did some poems, and in looking at them, I went over because these were earlier poems about a friend of mine who had cancer. And the poems were so neat, and the cancer wasn't.
Exactly.
And it seemed ridiculous to write such neat poems about this not neat business. It just wasn't fitting. So I had to go back and unneat the poems. One of the things I heard about cancer is that sometimes when it starts spreading, etc., people say that it is blooming. Something is growing in the strong man. It is blooming, they say, but not a flower. He has planted so much in me, so much. I am not willing, gardener, to give you up to this. Now these are, I think there are here 4 poems. All but one of them are written in my husband's voice. One of the things that Fred did was, during the last couple of years of his life, he changed his name. Now that he is no longer with us, I can tell you that he was, on the birth certificate, it was Freddie. Freddie so-and-so, so-and-so Clifton. Well, he thought that was terribly undignified. So he decided when he got tremendously dignified, to be Frederick. You know, I don't see that made any difference because everybody called him Fred anyway. But he thought it was important, and so it was. But one of the things he said to me in November when he was very ill was, one day he said, "I'm going back to my true identity." And I thought about that. I thought about what our true identity is. I suppose we don't know anyway. And also, he was cremated. And in looking at what the cremains, they call it, I expected to see ash, you know. But there was no ash. There were all these bright bones. Yes, anyway, I'm going back to my true identity. And this is in Fred's voice. I was ready to return to my rightful name. I saw it hovering near in blazoned script, and passing through fire, I claimed it. Here is a box of stars for my living wife. Tell her to scatter them, pronouncing no name. Tell her there is no deathless name a body can pronounce. Let's talk something about what our lives are like, I suppose.
Okay.
I remember last time we both had mothers who were
Yes.
influential in our lives.
Right.
Perhaps in different ways.
Yes.
My mother,
Although all mothers are influential in the same way, too.
Yeah.
Because
is that like all happy families?
Right. So I wrote an essay about my mother in Yen called Amused, and when I first wrote it, I wrote it for a collection of essays by women which never appeared, but anyway, I had my essay. And when I first wrote it, I thought it would be of very limited interest because of the rather special circumstances of my life. My mother was over 45 when I was born. She was more like a grandmother than like a mother, and needless to say, I was an only child. And our relationship was quite different because of this great age difference. So I thought that this would appeal to a very specialized audience. And yet when I would read it aloud, women would weep, and which really surprised me. But I decided that what made people weep was the image, which is like the pelican feeding its child out of its breast's blood, which is what I think in a way all mothers do, all good mothers, or all women who have any instinct for motherhood at all, is that nourishment, even if it is at the expense of your life, that goes on. I think that's the thing that's in common whether your mother's 15 or 45.
It's interesting because you were born after your mother was 45. My mother died at 44. Yet she was my mother wrote poetry. She wrote verse, iambic pentameter. And when I would try my little writing, she would say to me, "No, baby, that's not no poem. Mama will show you how to write a poem." And she would write this iambic pentameter. But she was so wonderful at making me believe that my writing a poem was not a strange thing. That my feeling that I could do this. Of course I could do it. I was me. And she didn't put it, I was her daughter. Why, I was Lucille. Of course I could write a poem or anything else, tap dance, whatever. I have a friend in Santa Cruz whose name is Lucille. And she's Chinese. And I went to visit her one day. And we looked in her photo album. I love looking at people's photographs. And there was a picture of her with her Shirley Temple cup. And I used to have a Shirley Temple cup, and I started thinking about, now we are the same age, we were born the same year, and our first child, each of us had as first child a daughter who were just a year apart in age. And I started thinking about both of our mothers trying to make us into Shirley Temple. And so we both laughed a good laugh, and this is called Album for Lucille Chan Hall. First picture. It is 1939. Our mothers are turning our hair around rags. Our mothers have filled our Shirley Temple cups. We drink it all. Second picture. 1939 again. Our Shirley Temple curls. Shirley yellow, Shirley black. Our colors are fading. Later, we had to learn ourselves back across 2 oceans, into bound feet and nappy hair. Third photograph, 1958 and 9. We have dropped daughters, African and Chinese. We think they will be beautiful. We think they will become themselves. Last photograph, it is 1985. She is. They are.
It is important to try things that you haven't done before. And you're also sort of going against a trend, too, because critics like to be able to pigeonhole you. They like to say, oh, she writes lyric poetry, or he writes poems about apartheid or some social issue. She writes poems in form, he writes free verse. If you try everything, they really don't know what to do with you.
Part of the fun of getting to be an old party when you have worked in form is that at a certain point you get to invent your own forms, and you get to take joy in your own rhymes. My favorite rhyme that I ever had was in this poem. It is funny and Cyril Connolly. Now, you have to be a real pro to do that, right? Afternoon happiness. At a party, I spy a handsome psychiatrist and wish, as we all do, to get her advice for free. Doctor, I'll say, I'm supposed to be a poet. All life's awfulness has been grist to me. We learn that happiness is a Chinese meal, while sorrow is a nourishment forever. My new environment is California dreamer. I'm fearful I'm forgetting how to brood. And doctor, another thing has got me worried. I'm not drinking as much as I should. At home, I want to write a happy poem on love or a love poem of happiness. But they won't do. The tensions of every day, the rub, the minor abrasions of any two who share one space. There's no substitute for tragedy. But in this chapter, tragedy belongs to that other life, the old life before us. Here is my aphorism of the day. Happy people are monogamous, even in California. So how does the poem play without the paraphernalia of betrayal and loss? I don't have a jealous eye or fear, and neither do you. In truth, I'm fond of your ex-mate, whom I name my wife-in-law. My former husband, that old disaster, is now just funny, so laugh we do in what Cyril Connolly has called the endless nocturnal conversation of marriage, which may be the best part. Darling, must I love you in light verse without the tribute of profoundest art. Of course it won't last. You will break my heart, or I yours, by dying. I could weep over that, but now it seems forced here in these heaven hills, the mourning doves mourning, the squirrels mating, my old cat warm on my lap. Here on our terrace, as from below, comes a musical cursing as you mend my favorite plate. Later, of course, I could pick a fight. There's always material in that. But we don't come from fighting people, those who scream out red-hot I ams in their hate. No love. The heavy poems will have to come from temps perdu, fertile with pain, or perhaps detonated by terrors far beyond this place, where the world rends itself, and its tainted waters rise in the east to erode our safety here. Much as I want to gather a lifetime thrift and craft my cunning skills tied in a knot for you, there is only this useless happiness as gift.
Have you ever been able to be very articulate on the philosophy of poetry?
No.
I'm such a nuts and bolts person. I can deal with the details, and I think I can shorten the period between writing the poem and figuring out what's the matter with it for people. But I'm not good at just sitting around talking about it in the abstract.
This poem is called Exodus. And it's written in somebody else's voice, not mine. She's, I think, middle-aged, Middle Western lady without a lot of education, but a good eye, something of a yenta, something of a gossip. And I woke up with her voice saying the first lines of this poem to me. I read the other day that the latest theory is that dreams don't mean anything. They're just a bunch of crossed wires. Well, I don't believe it, and I don't think any poet believes that. Exodus. We are coming down the pike, all of us in no particular order, not grouped by age. Wanda and Val, her fourth husband, Sally Swift, the fellows who play bridge every Thursday at Mason's Grill in the back, two of them named George. We are all coming down the pike. Somebody whose face I can't make out is carrying old Mrs. Sandow wrapped in a pink nightie. Her little pink toes peep out from the hem of her cotton afghan like pink pea pods, as pink as her little old scalp showing through. Be careful, mister, don't lose a hold of her. She has to come down the pike. Maybelle and Ruth walk together holding hands. Maybelle wears tennis shorts and a sweatband as she strides along steadily in her golf shoes. Ruth has on something flimsy, already ripped, and slingbacks, for God's sake. Imagine her feet tomorrow. She'll have to drop out. But right now they are both coming down the pike. Richard had to leave his piano. He looks sort of unfinished. His long, pale fingers wave like anemone, or is it amoeba, I mean. He's artistic, but would never have been of the first rank, though he's changed his name 3 times. He doesn't like the mob he's with. But you can't be picky when you're coming down the pike. One of the monitors wants us to move faster, but you can't really organize this crowd. The latch on the birdcage was loose, so the budgie escaped about 2 miles back, but Mrs. Rappaport still lugs his cage. She's expecting the budgie to catch up any minute. Its name was Sweetie. I can't stand sentimentality and pet names at a time like this, when we should be concentrating all our efforts on getting down the pike. Who would have thought we would all be walking? Except, of course, for Mrs. Sandow and Dolly Bliss, in her motorized wheelchair and her upswept hairdo. Someone has piled 6 hat boxes on her lap. She can hardly see over, poor lady. It isn't fair. And who needs picture hats at a time like this? But they are probably full of other things, the kind of useless stuff you grab up in a panic when there's no time to think or plan, and you've got 10 minutes before they order you down the pike. Bill Watkins is sore that he wasn't chosen monitor because he lacks leadership qualities, but he rushes up and down the lines anyhow, snapping like a sheepdog. The Ruddy family, all 8 of them redheads, has dropped out for a picnic, using a burnt-out car as a table. Not me. I'm saving my sandwiches. The Ruddys were always feckless. They won't laugh tomorrow when they run out of food on the pike. Of course, Al Fitch has nothing. Not even a pocket knife, let alone a gun. He had to get Maury Phelps to shoot his dog for him. No pets. You can see the reason for that. Although nobody fussed about the budgie. I expect there's a few smuggled cats inside some of the children's jackets. But old Al Fitch, he just strolls along with his hands in his pockets, whistling, "Good night, Irene." My husband says I shouldn't waste my breath describing us, but save it for the hike ahead. We're just like people anywhere, though we may act crazier right now. Maybelle drags Ruth along faster and faster, though she's stumbling and sobbing and has already fallen twice. Richard, who's been so careful of his hands, just hit Al and told him to whistle something else, like Bach. A hymn he wrote that we could sing. Will you be trying to sing wherever you are as you come down the pike? Thank you.